When I was in high school, one of our high school field trips was to go caving. I've never went caving before in my life, and it was the only time I went caving. And as the leader was walking, we're walking behind him. It's getting slippery and wet, and as the leader's talking, he's getting ready to tell us what path we needed to go on to be safe. And as he's talking, I'm wandering, not listening, and I hit a rock that is wet. And my feet go out from under me, and I land on my butt, and I slide all the way down the rock. And I remember him saying, I was just getting ready to tell you, you want to avoid going that way. So, sometimes when we're told or advised in a way that is going to help us, we don't listen. And then you remember, as you were younger, I remember it very, very it's fresh in my mind because of Jalen. But when your parents would tell you to do something and you'd say, in a minute, I'll get it. Can you take the garbage out? I'll get it tonight. Or I want to do homework. Or you need to get your homework done. Well, but first, Dad, I need to do this. Or I want to get a job. Well, how about before you get a job, you get your grades up? And so many times the first thing that comes out of our mouth is when we hear these things as a kid is, well, but first let me do this. And then if you remember the days before GPS, the paper maps, that you could never fold up the same way, and you would be trying to, at least in my car, with my parents, it was, my mom was a navigator, but my dad was the one that usually said that she was wrong. I don't know how it was in your car, but she'd be looking at the map and say, no, I think we need to take this next street, the next highway right. And my dad would say, but if we go up a little bit further, we can catch up on that highway we need a little bit further north. So you have somebody who's supposed to be helping you navigate, but you're not really listening to them. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Before that, we're going to pray. Let's pray. Lord, I ask you to be with all of us. I ask you to be with the scripture that we're going to read, and let it open up hearts and ears and give us a new perspective of how we can carry it out into the world. I ask you to be with me and let my words be pleasing to you. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to start off reading a couple scriptures from Galatians. This is in chapter 5. It's a long scripture, so I'm going to just kind of break it down a little bit. Christ has set us free for freedom. Therefore, stand firm and don't submit to the bondage of slavery again. That's our warning, because whatever, like last week we talked about what we were holding on to that kept us from growing closer to Christ. We submitted that. So let God be with us so we don't go back to the same bondage of whatever it was that we were holding on to before we went to God. And then it goes on to say, you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only don't let this freedom be an opportunity to indulge your selfish impulses, but serve each other through love. So following Christ doesn't give us the right to do anything that we want to. We are to love with that freedom. And then it goes on to say, I say, be guided by the Spirit, and you won't carry out their selfish desires. A person's selfish desires are set against the Spirit, and the Spirit is set against one's selfish desires, so they conflict. They are opposed to each other, so you shouldn't do whatever you want to do. So we can't do our selfish desires while following God. God is what should be leading us. God is the person, the Spirit, that should be leading us. And I want to go to Luke. This is Luke 9. Jesus sets out for Jerusalem. As the time approached, when Jesus was to be taken up into heaven, he determined to go to Jerusalem. He sent messengers on ahead of him. Along the way, they entered a Samaritan village to prepare for his arrival. But the Samaritan villagers refused to welcome him because he was determined to go to Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they said, "Lord, do you want us to call us to fire down from the heaven and consume them?" But Jesus turned and spoke sternly to them, and they went on to another village. See, they weren't going to be satisfied with shaking the dust off their feet. They wanted to send down the fire and brimstone from heaven. And this is something else that is part of our freedom that we have when we're with God, is how we approach the people that don't want to hear what we're selling. They don't want to hear the story that we want to tell. So how do we handle that? We want to say, you're going to hell, so I'm done with you. Or you say, okay, you're satisfied with planting a seed, and you move on to the next town. It's one of the worst parts about ministry, which we'll get to later. It goes on to say, as Jesus and his disciples traveled along the road, someone said to him, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus replied, "Foxes have dens, and the birds of the sky have nests, but the human one has no place to lay his head." Then Jesus said to someone else, "Follow me." He replied, "Lord, first let me go and bury my father." Jesus said to him, "Let the dead bury their own dead. When you go and spread the good news of God's kingdom." Someone else said to Jesus, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say goodbye to those in my house." Jesus said to him, "No one who puts a hand on the plow and looks back is fit for God's kingdom." You know, this is what Jesus is all about. Jesus is telling us over and over again, the past is the past. The past is something that we learn from, but we don't live in. If you can picture the plower with one hand, that plow is going to go all over the place because you can't guide it when you're not focused on where you're going. So I'm going to share a story with you that I'm going to ask for a lot of grace on this, because it's a story I don't think I've shared with many of you. So, as you all know, when we were at the old building, I was appointed to a different church. And I went to that church, and we were there for about 9 months. I was able to, just like us, they had a youth group that was very active at the time. We wanted to start a men's group. We were getting ready to work on BBS. We had 2 new families that came in with kids. good stuff going on here. I don't know why you want to pull me from here. Because I don't understand why put a pause on that. I know what we went through as far as Griffith. I know that we are hurting. We were hurting because we sold the building. And whether or not you want to believe it or not, grief also covers more than just losing someone you love. It is an honest feeling when you say you're grieving a building. Because there's a lot of memories there. And I remember thinking, I know the hurt that they're going through. I know the change that they're going through. I know how disappointed and defeated they must feel. But why is God leading me to leave this to go to that? And I prayed a lot during that time. Because I wasn't sure how I was going to attack bringing you all back together again. And I remember praying to God, saying, I trust you. I answered your call, go, follow me, come follow me. And in my prayer it was, I don't understand. But a little voice that I kept hearing in my head, that I wasn't ready to listen to those directions. Just like when you're looking at a map, and somebody's telling you turn here and you don't think you should. I kept having a little voice in my head. Anybody want to know what that might have been? Maybe take a guess, anybody? The voice in my head kept saying, because you know the hurt, the pain, the defeat, the frustration that they're going through. That was what God was trying to tell me, but I wasn't ready to listen to it. See, I knew what was happening in Griffith. I felt what was happening in Griffith. But when the time came, I questioned about why I was coming back here because I didn't trust God completely. That's what we're talking about today, is the fact that God doesn't say, follow me when you're ready. He doesn't say, take a month. Take your time, make a decision. God says, follow me. And that's what we have to respond to. God, I don't understand. I'm not sure where you're taking me with this, but I'm going to trust you. See, God doesn't want us to be in halfway. And that's why my expectations for our future is high. Because God can do anything. And I feel Him working here. And I feel Him working in the things that we're doing. But we have to be fully trusting in God in order to know the direction that He wants us to go. There's been many times where God has led me in a direction I'm sure you all can relate. God has led you in a direction where you're like, I don't get it. It could be the person that was rude to you in the grocery line. I don't understand why that had to happen. Maybe it was because it was teaching you patience or how to handle a different situation. God calls us to come follow me. Come follow me to go out into the world. And if we don't trust Him fully, we're going to be hitting those wet rocks and slipping down and falling places that we don't want to call. Believing in God gives us freedom, but not the freedom to not answer his call completely. So I ask you to pray. If there's something that's been on your heart that you feel like you're not understanding where God's taking you with it, to trust him with it. Because one day you'll know why that was the direction he wanted you to go in. You can butt first your mom, your dad, but as far as hearing what God has to say, I wouldn't put God on. He's persistent. He loves you. And he will keep telling you the message over and over again until you're ready to hear it. When God calls,